So I've just spoken about the use of technology to complement your ability to look after yourself when you're out in the remote areas of planet Earth, or you just get yourself into a situation. Now, hand in hand with having the technology, remember anything like this with a circuit, with a battery, with these days with passwords and all sorts of other technology-centric nuances, there's always potential for a failure. So we need to step back, take the Special Forces model yet again and have layers. We've already mentioned those in the last lecture about manual navigation, supported navigation, and satellite-assisted call for assistance. So there are 3 layers automatically in place, okay, just as a normal baseline set of arrangements. Beyond that, I need to also have the foundational capability to call for assistance or to make it known that I require assistance in a far less technology-centric fashion. And then we go back a few decades in terms of how we communicate to aircraft assets or ground assets that are involved in a search for our person in any given wilderness location. So what do we have in that space? Let's look at things we should carry on our person. First off, we should carry a whistle and a mirror. Now, those 2 things are what we call active signals. We're going to talk about them in more detail shortly. But the mirror allows me to call for assistance at a long range. Providing I've got sunlight, I can send a beam of targeted light, reflected light, out to a visible horizon line. Right, so if there's an aircraft overhead, I can sort of draw its attention to me. Now we'll talk about the specifics of that shortly. A whistle, obviously an aircraft's not going to hear that, not even a person in a vehicle is likely to hear that. But when search assets that are ground-based are either moving on foot through an area or they're in vehicles that pause and listen, then we can use a whistle to attract attention to our situation. And that helps them by giving them a direction to key in towards. Okay? So those 2 are very self-responsible. You can put them in a pocket and carry them with you. They help not only with external assistance, but with internal assistance. If you work in very close jungle environments, it doesn't take very far. We're talking under 10 meters for people to become disorientated, and they look around and they go, I can't see where the other group members are. And then they start to wander off thinking that they're moving in the right direction and they're fundamentally moving further and further away from their group. A whistle then helps them reorientate themselves and to relocate the group, or the group to relocate them. Okay, so that's something to think about. And a lot of survival equipment these days has a built-in whistle for exactly that reason. If you've got kids, for example, you should responsibly train your kids or teach your children that when we're in the bush, they carry their whistle. So that if they wander off and they get stuck or they get into some kind of problem, they can just sit down and blow the whistle and mum and dad come and find them. A lot easier to track in a sound like a whistle blast than it is a wail or a groan or a yelp. And we'll talk about that specifically shortly. Other things you should carry with you. This is a space blanket, reflective mylar blanket. Now that does a whole stack of different jobs for me in a survival environment. And we're going to talk about that specifically as one of our baseline equipment items. We've covered it already in terms of shelter and water collection. So those 2 areas are already addressed by this. But it's reflective, it's like a mirror. So it will constantly be a source of reaching out for assistance as well, both passively and actively, and we'll talk about that shortly too. This is a hangover from military service, but it's invaluable in terms of being able to stand out and contrast from a very, very mute background, either to someone at distance, an aircraft overhead, or vehicles or motorbike riders that are searching in an area. You know, we can make ourselves more apparent by just calling for help. In the military, we call this a marker panel. Marks my location for a whole range of tactical purposes, but also to be extracted by aircraft or other external assets so that we can get home. Right? So very, very cheap. It's just a bright orange, sometimes a bright pink, but they are very, very noticeable colours in the background of the wilderness. Okay? So great for a whole range of things, and multi-purpose. Again, we can use those for a whole range of other things. This one doubles as my plate in some situations, for example. So it's a multi-purpose tool, whilst its primary function is communication. So those are some examples of things I can carry. The other thing we've discussed already in terms of fire lighting, I've got a fire steel with me all the time as part of my baseline equipment, on my person, on my belt, in my pack, in my vehicle, etc. I've got a fire lighting device. In fact, I've got multiples of them. They allow me to use fire then to also call for assistance. So hand in hand with what we've discussed there, you should be getting an understanding that I need to carry a number of non-tech or low-tech and some technology supported items that help me call for assistance. That is a self-responsible thing to do. Okay? Most of us have people who would be concerned about our well-being. So we should honour and respect that and act accordingly. Just because I carry all this stuff doesn't mean I detract from my immersive experience in the wilderness in any way, shape or form. In fact, it gives me a greater sense of comfort because I know that if I have to, I can call for assistance. And I've got that technology and no technology layering into my communication ensemble to make sure I've got the best chance of attracting attention to myself should it be required.